You're listening to the MRC-TV podcast, Public Service Announcement.
Welcome to the MRC-TV podcast. I'm Eric Scheiner. You may remember back in January, the Covington High School Catholic kids were in Washington, D.C. when they were approached by Native American Nathan Phillips, and video footage of the two being near each other went viral. And of course, the media really jumped the gun on this one.
Troubling scene many are calling racist played out in Washington yesterday on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Some students harassing an older Native American man, a Vietnam vet, in the midst of a special ceremony. Tammy Leitner has more.
It was meant to be a time for Indigenous people to be seen and heard. But this viral video taken during Friday's rally in Washington has sparked outrage and confusion. The video appears to show dozens of youths wearing Make America Great Again hats, mocking Native American elder and Vietnam veteran Nathan Phillips.
You've probably seen it by now, the viral video sweeping the internet of a mob of MAGA hat-wearing high school students surrounding a Native American chanting and drumming in the nation's capital at the Indigenous Peoples March. The Native elder was identified as Nathan Phillips, a member of the Omaha Nation and a Vietnam vet. He and others were harassed and taunted by students from Covington Catholic High School, a private all-boys school in Kentucky, who, according to the school's Facebook page, were in D.C. attending the March for Life.
Nick Sandmann, the teen that was featured in that video footage, has an attorney. He's suing many different media outlets, CNN, NBC, and of course the Washington Post. But a recent decision this week has greatly impacted that lawsuit. It's going to be allowed to move forward. With the latest on the lawsuit, we have Nick Sandmann's attorney, Todd McMurty. Todd, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, the big news this week is a judge has reversed part of a prior decision, and this involves Nick Sandmann's suit against the Washington Post. What can you tell us that happened this week?
Okay, on Monday, the federal court here in Kentucky of the Eastern District, Judge William O. Bertelsmann issued a decision that basically reopened the Nick Sandmann case against the Washington Post. What had happened is that the initial complaint that we filed in the case was dismissed after a lot of briefing against the Post. We read the judge's order. We thought we could do some things to improve our complaint, provide him some additional information. We asked his permission to do that. He allowed us to do it. We had an oral argument on the issue in court a few weeks ago, and then just this week he issued a decision that partially reversed his prior decision.
So partially reversing his prior decision allows this lawsuit to move forward, and he changed his mind because of what exactly? What exactly were the attorneys able to do here?
Initially, the judge ruled that most of the statements in the Washington Post reporting constituted opinion. What we did is we tried to persuade the judge that there was additional video evidence that would show that what Nathan Phillips said was not his opinion, but instead we allege that it's a false factual narrative. And by alleging that it's a false factual narrative and providing the additional information about Phillips' history as a professional protester, as a provocateur, and a troublemaker, we were able to make the court reconsider its position. And the technical aspect on the defamation claim is that the Post republished Nathan Phillips' statements, which we contend were false factual narrative, and in republishing those statements without an adequate investigation, the Post was negligent. So after reading our revised evidentiary record and allegations in a revised complaint, the judge said that we had a plausible complaint and that we could proceed with discovery.
Now, you've characterized this as a really big win.
Yeah, it is. The reason it's a big win is that it preserves the three key elements of our case, and that is that the Washington Post and other media outlets alleged that Nicholas Sandmann, they said that, they alleged that Nicholas Sandmann blocked and prevented Nathan Phillips from retreating from the space where he was beating the drum. But the wider video evidence shows that's not true. So from that evidence about Nicholas Sandmann, the Post and others wrote their articles, which had they were basically in context absolutely false. Everything that Phillips said that happened was false. and the Post reporting on that was a false interpretation or an incorrect interpretation of false events. So that gives us enough to still have solid claims.
Now, they have claimed, my understanding is the Washington Post has claimed that, well, we were reporting the information as accurately as we believed it to be at the time, but you disagree with that tack that they're taking.
Right. I don't know that that is the journalistic standard of care, that you can just go with the first thing that somebody tells you. And the way I would respond to that particular assertion is that the Post, in its initial reporting on the matter, linked the 1 minute viral video that was, traveling all over the world on January 18th and 19th to its initial article. And it's just journalistic malpractice to use an unsourced viral video as a basis for reporting and for a story. And in fact, if you go on the Post website, they have a whole segment on fake videos and how to spot them. And the false viral video meets every criteria that they list on their own website. So they broke all their own standards to do that. So I don't think that's a fair way to defend their conduct in this case.
Well, of course, they have a lot of unsourced reporting that they've been using over the years. What's interesting is, and you're also involved with this, Nick Sandmann is also involved with suing CNN and NBC for the same basic reasons that this lawsuit's being brought forth against the Washington Post.
Yes. The difference is that Nathan Phillips was, on a tear that week. He was meeting with every news source that he could. And when he spoke with CNN and NBC, his tails got taller and he was entrapped more in untruths. So in that process, NBC and MSNBC, CNN, all of those outlets reported kind of a bigger tale. So their reporting was even worse than the Washington Post.
Does this decision impact those lawsuits as well? I mean, I know they're separate lawsuits going forward, but...
Well, I suspect it will. They're all currently before Judge Bertelsmann on motions to dismiss.
Oh, so they're all before the same judge. Okay.
Yes, right. Same judge. And so if he follows the same rationale, then we should get a similar decision. But I don't wish to speak for the judge. That's generally not a good idea for lawyers to do that.
This moves forward the lawsuit. Now, this particular lawsuit against the Washington Post is $250 million. And a lot of people say, oh, that's outrageous. That's a high amount of money. How did you come to the terms of this money? Because obviously this is a young man's life, 16 years old at the time that this incident happened. And this is going to impact him all the way into the future.
Right. I think the first thing to recognize when we throw out those big numbers is that we're really seeking to get back Nicholas Sandmann's reputation, and that's functionally and fundamentally impossible in today's society because what's occurred on the internet is never going to go away in his life. There's a permanent record that will always come up anytime they search his name. So these large numbers are really about the harm to his reputation in a way to characterize that. Now, if you ask how could a jury possibly award that much money, the way I would propose that a jury could do that is if you look at the amount of money that was spent by the Washington Post and the amount of time and effort that they put into defaming Mr. Sandmann or Nicholas Sandmann, what's that worth? How much would you have to pay to get that much publicity for something else? I would speculate that it's worth millions of dollars. And then in the United States, the Supreme Court allows a plaintiff to seek punitive damages for grossly negligent or reckless conduct. And if you say the jury decides that the cost of fixing Nicholas's reputation is $10 million, you could tack on another $90 million in punitive damages. So that's how you get to those big numbers. And those things are yet to be determined, but are things that can be determined through proper analysis.
After going through all this, how is Nikolas doing? Obviously, it was in January. It's been some time since the incident occurred.
Nikolas was 16 years old and a high school junior when this happened. He's now 17 and he's a senior at Covington Catholic High School. I mean, honestly, he's doing well. I mean, but he does not have the same freedom that his classmates have. So, for example, he might go out to a restaurant and somebody will either glare at him or buy him dinner. You don't know which one it's going to be. And that happens to him. And so he's constantly on the lookout, constantly, in a state of worry about is somebody going to come up and harass him or threaten him. And things like this have happened. So it's not an unreasonable concern on his part. And the other thing that would weigh on a young man's conscience, if you or I were 17 again and we were in this circumstance, we'd think, well, I've got my life ahead of me, and every step of the way I'm going to have the weight of this incident where I did nothing wrong and where the entire world lied about what I did and criticized me for no good reason hanging over your head. And I could go on at length about what that means, and we can all speculate from our own personal experience what that means, but it's significant.
No, and this is never going to go away. This is, it's on the internet, and it was such a national news story. And what's weird about this case is he was bullied by adults, whether you consider it being Nathan Phillips or the media itself and the decisions and the way they decided to approach this reporting. This young man was bullied by adults making decisions against him based on pretty much a hat that he was wearing.
Yeah, it's outrageous. I mean, I was on the Tucker Carlson show last night, and he asked a question, why doesn't Jeff Bezos settle this case? And because I had a microphone in my ear and was staring into a camera in Cincinnati, I didn't really get the full import of what he said. But your question is very much the same thing, and that is that these adults should all be horribly ashamed about what they did. And why do these organizations, instead of fighting us tooth and nail in court, they should have come out before we even sued them and said, let's make this right. But really, none of them have done it. None. And it's just hard to believe that nobody has done anything. Adults, people like Jeff Bezos, people like Jeff Zucker have done nothing to remedy this situation.
As an attorney, though, are you surprised by that? Because if they admit that they have done something wrong, then, of course, they pretty much just admit that they're culpable right off the get-go.
Well, as an attorney, I'm not surprised by that, but I've learned a lot about journalism since this started, and I would think that a lot of these organizations could have come out and provided full retractions right out of the gate. Instead, they circled the wagons and said we did nothing wrong. I just think that that's completely irresponsible.
I also noticed that in, I don't think it's the Washington Post lawsuit, but the one involving CNN, it mentions that it's part of an overall agenda to discredit the president, and they were using this incident in this video to do that.
Well, anybody that watches the news can find the parallels between what happened to Nicholas Sandmann and what happened to Brett Kavanaugh and what they do to President Trump every day of the week. I mean, there's been a concerted effort to demonize people who show any allegiance to the president or profess any conservative ideals. And if you happen to be a white male who graduated from a Catholic high school, you're at double risk.
So what's next? What happens? I know this opens up more a period of discovery and things move forward. What are the next steps in this case following the judge's recent reversal?
The next steps are that on December 3rd, we have a hearing before Judge Bertelsmann here in Covington. At that hearing, he will set out a schedule for the case to proceed. He's asked the attorneys to decide if other parties needed to be added, such as Nathan Phillips. Maybe that parties like NBC and CNN need to be consolidated into one lawsuit. So we'll address all those questions beginning on December 3rd. But after that, the federal rules of procedure require the parties to exchange information and then would permit Nicholas Sandmann to seek discovery from the Washington Post. And in that process, we would be able to look, behind the curtain of what happened at the Post over that weekend that they defamed Nikolas. We'd be able to do things like obtain their internal emails, their internal note-taking system, drafts of articles, text messages between the reporters and editors and so forth, and develop a full picture of what the Post's thought process was as they proceeded to purvey these lies.
Because everyone initially reacted to the initial video that was released, and as more footage came out on the internet and more was discovered, the story changed. But how long you'd be able to kind of discover how long it took them before they knew this stuff was out there, before they decided to, maybe we'll update our story here.
Yeah, I mean, the Post, we have to be fair in looking at these issues. The Post did quickly publish Nick Sandmann's own statement. And they did some things that were better than, say, what NBC or CNN did.
I'm not surprised
and I give
with
them
that.
credit for that.
I'm not surprised about that.
Yeah. But the other thing is that in this process of reporting, they knew very early on, or they should have known. And that's, the centerpiece of our complaint is that they were negligent in republishing the false factual narrative put forward by Nathan Phillips. But we know from our own research that early on Saturday, January 19th, there were full-length videos out on Facebook and on the internet that you could review, and people found those in minutes just by doing a search. Clearly, nobody at the Washington Post did that. Because if they had, most likely they would not have, well, we hope they would not have published the damning articles that they did.
Right. Well,
but maybe they did know it. And if they did know it and proceeded anyway, we'll probably find that out in discovery.
Yeah, well, I know in the lawsuit that you folks claim that the Post reported some, and I'll quote this here, implied provably false facts. What are some of those facts that you're saying that they obviously implied from the get-go?
Okay, the provably false facts, the main ones are that Nicholas Sandmann blocked Nathan Phillips and prevented him from retreating. The clear evidence in the video shows that Nicholas Sandmann was kind of looking off to his right, turns, and there's Nathan Phillips beating a drum right in front of him. And after that, Nicholas Sandmann did nothing. So that is that's provably false, and it was implied in the coverage that what occurred is different. You know, they said basically that he swarmed, targeted, prevented him from moving, and we all know that that's not true. So, and the whole gist of the article that the Post published, those initial articles, suggest racial misconduct, targeting, attacking, race-based animus, all of that stuff. And those are implied facts that are not.
There was
true.
also reports that that the group of kids was chanting something that was never chanted that we found in the video.
Right, that's a good point, and that I failed to mention that. It's one of the things that the court noted in its order, that Nathan Phillips' allegation that the kids were chanting "Build that wall, build that wall" is provably false. It's part of the false factual narrative. It's not heard in any video, and so it just didn't happen. So clearly, the jury is going to be able to decide whether Mr. Phillips is telling the truth when they hear his side of the story and when they see the actual tapes of what happened that day, or the video of what happened that day.
Why do you feel it's important to hold these media entities, be it CNN, NBC, or the Washington Post, responsible for this in this case? Because it seems to us at the Media Research Center, they get away with an awful lot.
Right, and I think that if we are able here in Kentucky to obtain a substantial verdict against one of these news organizations, it's going to cause every editor across the country to think twice before they drag somebody's name through the mud. I mean, I think even if we had to present a case of actual malice against Nicholas Sandmann, we'd be able to do that. We'll see in discovery, and we'll learn more in discovery. But I do think that it's an egregious act that these news organizations engaged in, and I think that this lawsuit could send a very powerful message that might tamp things down a little bit and make it better for the next person.
All right, so discovery process begins. Things will move further. I assume this case is going to drag on for a while.
Yeah, a case like this is going to take some time. I wouldn't want it to take too terribly long, but I generally tell clients cases, bigger cases are going to take 18 months to 2 years to get to trial. But in federal court, the federal courts do impose some pretty tight time regulations. So we'll know on December 3rd how long the judge thinks the case is going to take. And that means a lot more than how long what the attorneys think the case is going to take. All
right. Thank you. Attorney Todd McMurty, thank you for joining us and keeping us updated on the Nick Sandmann case.
Best wishes. Thank you.
And thank you for tuning into the MRC-TV podcast. You can catch up on old podcast episodes on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. Until next week, we'll see you then.